Hello, and welcome to the Smart Injury Doctors Podcast, the injury market's top program for doctors, lawyers, and insurers who want to gain greater insight on how to improve patient recovery results and deliver better services in the U.S. injury market. Please welcome your host, Dr. Jeffrey Allen Kronk.
Okay, doctors, today what I want to talk about is the importance of guidelines. Why are guidelines so important? Guidelines, I've been in the spinal injury space really heavily since 1995. I've been a chiropractor since 1989. Licensed the whole time, practiced for 17 years. And when I got into my injury practice and really started to go heavy into injuries, guidelines became like key. They're killer. There's nothing better than guidelines. There's providers out there, there's trainers and coaches out there that I've heard talk about the fact that they don't like guidelines or don't use guidelines. I personally think that whenever I hear that, the person saying that might have some sort of good rationale, but I don't know. I think of it like, wow, I'm going to look in one of their ears and be able to see outside the other, because I don't know what that means. Who wouldn't want a guideline? If you understand what a guideline is, then who wouldn't want to use guidelines, especially when guidelines were so proactively promoting what you do? So actively promoting the significance of the condition that you treat, who wouldn't want to use these guidelines? So medical or chiropractic guidelines are systematically developed statements designed to assist practitioners and patients in making decisions about appropriate health care for specific clinical circumstances. What does that mean? It means, hey, if you've got this level of injury, this is what you would do. This is appropriate health care. The guidelines are produced through a meticulous process that involves a combination. So whenever you're doing guidelines, it's a combination of expert review, evidence review, expert consensus, and it's also gets revised. So let's talk about the process of developing a guideline. Because people get into research. Oh my gosh, do you have any research? Do you have any research? I have something better. I don't need research. I have guidelines, because guidelines are senior to research. Think of a guideline or research as a suggestion. Think of a guideline as a law. Like people could suggest, oh, the tax, here's a better way to do the taxes. Here's a better way to do this. Here's a better way to do that. Okay, and research shows that this would make us this much money if we were taxed this way. Okay, the only problem is there's a tax code. That's the guideline for how you file and determine your taxes. So the guideline is senior to research. Now the problem with guidelines, same with taxes or codes, is sometimes they're behind the times, but that's fine. That we all have to just change the guidelines. But the guideline of building a guideline is somebody identifies that you need a guideline, like an impairment guideline. What's an impairment guideline? Impairment guideline is if the body is damaged and injured, how much is the body function reduced, and what is the effect on patients' activities of daily living, and how do we set up a guideline that basically makes it so all doctors do something the same, so we don't have everybody's personal opinion involved? Well, we'd set up a guideline, right? So what would happen? Well, they form a group. They form a group of experts to develop the guideline. This is how every guideline develops. In chiropractic, in medicine, in osteopathy, in physical therapy, I'm sure maybe it's in carpentry. I don't know. Maybe there's guidelines for that. I don't know. But whenever a guideline is formed, it's a multidisciplinary group of experts that are assembled to develop the guideline. And it typically includes clinicians, researchers, methodologists, and sometimes patients or patient representatives, or, it's a diverse group. Because what they're trying to do in the guideline, which is what makes guidelines so powerful, is they're trying to mitigate the bias. So it's very inclusive, so you don't mitigate you mitigate the bias. And then they develop the scope and the objective. They define what they want to accomplish in this. What's the patient population? What's involved? What are the clear objectives of the guideline? Then they start to do, once that's done, they start a systematic review of literature conducted to gather the best available evidence related to the clinical questions that they have. And these reviews are looking at relevant studies, assessing their quality, determining, synthesizing their findings, and they use standardized tools and grading systems and evaluation systems to put this research through these tools to make sure that the chaff is separated out and they get the pure stuff that they want. Then, once they have that, based on the element, they develop groups. So let's say the AMA. The AMA is developing impairment guides. Good. So they got a spine group. They got a cardiovascular group. They got a urogenital group. They have every single group, every single system in the body has got a group, right? So based on the elements, then this group, or the evidence, this group separates out into group, and they start to undergo review of all the data, and they review what the external experts have said, what the consensus said, and they're doing it to develop validity, clarity, and applicability. And the development group then revises the guidelines based on feedback, so they start putting it out to the public, and with consensus building methods, and they get feedback from experts. Then they draft a draft, then they do the next level. They actually draft the draft, and now it's available for public comment and review from other stakeholders, including healthcare providers, patients, policymakers. And these steps ensure that the guidelines are practical, acceptable, and relevant to those who will use them. And it makes them so they're not biased. Right? Then they're finalized and they're published. They're published. Then they're implemented and they're given, and then they periodically evaluate them and update them. So that's what a guideline is. That's why I like guidelines so much. If I'm in a deposition, I want to be in front of guidelines, right? One of the biggest issues that I have is that and it's not an issue that I have, it's just an issue that made my life a lot simpler, and I try to help other providers by providing educational programs that really simplify these guidelines, so you don't have to go out and spend months and months of your life studying these guidelines, because they're very, very simple. Impairment guidelines are simple. Surgical guidelines are simple when somebody's done it for you. Treatment guidelines are simple when somebody's done it for you. When they show you, okay, the treatment guideline, the surgical guideline, and the impairment guidelines, and these things all match up for your condition, it's simple. When you say, okay, gosh, if you have a disc herniation, good, what does Medscape say about it? What's the clinical presentation? Here it is. Well, it's only got 2 symptoms to it. What's Medscape's clinical presentation of a cervical sprain, which is both the disc and the non-disc ligaments? Oh, wow, look at how many more conditions are here. Tinnitus, wow, dizziness, blurred vision, visual disturbances, cognitive dysfunction, balance difficulties, headaches. Wow, all things that are not common with a disc, right? So it's that level of understanding that this stuff makes your life incredibly easy. It makes you lethal in depositions, and very relaxed and comfortable in depositions or trial. Because it's not your personal opinion anymore. It's not you on a more probable than not basis. It's not you against somebody that's credentials are much better than yours. I mean, there are doctors, believe it or not, in the chiropractic profession that have hundreds of pages on their CV. I've never seen anything like it. Hundreds and hundreds of pages in their CV, right? Of educational things that they've taken. Now, they should be, if I go, well, gosh, I don't know, I've got a page. Right? So, yes. So, if it's just a match of credentials, I'm going to lose. If it's a match of understanding, I'm going to win. Because I understand what the guidelines say. I understand my area. I don't need to have tons and tons of credentials that say I'm smart. I could just show it. And then I really don't even need any of those pieces of paper. Not that they're not good to have. I'm not saying that they're not good to have, and I'm not running down anybody that has them. I'm just saying I don't need that. And so guidelines are something that I teach in the Smart Injury Doctors program, because everything we do in that program is guideline driven. And the reason why they're guideline driven is because the guidelines are so damn acknowledging of what you do. A 25% whole person impairment is a large impairment. A patient that has a surgical fine level of ligament damage addressed under surgical guidelines that says the patient should have at least a 3-month conservative care failure before consideration of surgery is very valuable. It's very valuable to me. As a provider, it's very valuable to me as a trainer, as a coach, as somebody that's teaching doctors. It's extremely valuable. So now why? Because it puts you at ease. It elevates you to the top, easily to the top 10%, maybe the top 5% in your profession. That's what it did for me. I wanted to be in the top 2% of my profession. I'm a chiropractor. I want to be in the top 2% of my profession. Now, that doesn't mean if you ask me every question under the sun, moon, and stars, I'm going to be the one that passes that test the most. That's not what I'm talking about. I understand my condition completely. I'm really good at treating it. I get great patient results with it. And my documentation is stellar, and I'm very good at being able to simply explain it, and I know all the guidelines around it, so it's not my professional opinion anymore. That's what makes me lethal. That's what makes me good, and that's what makes it easier for me to teach. So guidelines are extremely important. Don't let anybody say that they're not. I love guidelines. We teach guidelines, and if you want to be more, you want to sleep good at night, you're going to go with guidelines. And when guidelines are, when it comes up, where guidelines are so saving grace, so to speak, is when somebody says, I think you're over-treating. I think you did something wrong. Okay, I teach our doctors, smart injury doctors, we teach them to list the guidelines that they use in their documentation, because those are the guidelines they have to be judged against. And the guidelines that we're putting in there are very, very, very helpful guidelines, and they're very broad. They leave room for you as a doctor. That's why we use them. They're incredibly good guidelines. So anybody that tells you that guidelines aren't good to use has never been in a situation where somebody is challenging them. Somebody is saying, hey, I think you did something wrong. Okay, here's what the guidelines say. What was wrong? Well, I think you're over treating this condition, and you're over evaluating it. Well, over treatment usually comes from under documentation. So it can look like there's over treatment when there's under documentation. That's most of the time when I see this, well, the person over treated, it's under documentation, and you can't document something after the fact. I can't go, well, I treated the person for 6 months and they had us, whatever, and now, well, somebody's attacking me for overutilization, and they're attacking me for the last 3 years of doing it with patients and everything else, and I sit there and go, well, no, there's a really serious condition here that I was treating, but I got to do the x-rays now to actually show you what it was. Nobody's going to do that. You can't do that. So know what your guidelines are. X-ray guidelines in the United States are incredible. X-ray guidelines, your typical your typical guidelines on your X-ray guidelines. I'm trying to think of the Nexus guidelines. There we go. The Nexus X-ray guidelines, which are guidelines that every single, pretty much all X-ray guidelines, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, fall under Nexus guidelines. And Nexus guidelines are incredibly validative for what a person does in chiropractic, incredibly. So if I looked at the Nexus guidelines, and the Nexus guidelines are going to tell me that, I'm just going to pull up a Nexus guideline right now. So you're all hearing me scroll down, and I'm going to just find it and pull it up. Live right on the podcast. I know it. I have it in here somewhere. Yes, here it is. Good. Nexus guidelines. I got to take a cervical x-ray if I got midline posterior spinal tenderness. Just about every chronic patient has that. And acute injury patients are going to have that. If I've got a painful, distracting injury that's present. Well, what's a painful, distracting injury? It's an injury that, in the car accident, they cut my foot off. The bottom of the car cut my foot off, and it's so distracting. I'm so distracted that I didn't know that I had a major head injury too. So I could have a painful, distracting injury. That's one aspect of a distracting injury. The other aspect of a distracting injury is a ligament injury or a bone injury, are both distracting injuries. So if I think I have a ligament injury or bone injury, I have to take radiographs. If the person was intoxicated, you're going to be more in medical emergency rooms. Person comes in, the person's generally not going to come in for a chiropractic exam intoxicated. But if they came into the emergency room in an accident and they were intoxicated, they have to take x-rays. If there's focal or neurological deficits there, well, what's a focal neurological deficit is present? Well, it's a brain condition, a cord condition, or a nerve condition. So if there's any interference to the nerve, or I suspect it, or any interference to the cord, or any interference to the brain, I have to take them. Now, I also have to if there's encephalopathy. So any altered level of consciousness is an indicator of that. That gets into your mild traumatic brain injuries. Anyone that knows how to dissect this Nexus X-ray guideline is one of the most powerful guidelines there are. And it's just an example. I'm giving you examples. Now, look it up. Go look up Google. Go Nexus X-ray guidelines. And just look them up. These guidelines are incredible. But they're used against you if you don't understand them. Well, the doctor wasn't following Nexus guidelines. Damn, I wasn't following Nexus guidelines. Well, what chiropractor would not follow Nexus guidelines? Did the patient have posterior spinal tenderness? Was there any sort of distracting injury present? Do I think they have a ligament or a bone condition present? Yes. Do they have any kind of focal or neurological deficits present? Yes, of course they did. That's what they came in with. That focal or neurological deficit is one of the things that I'm looking at. But again, the focal neurological deficit is a problem with the nerve, spinal cord, or the brain function. That's what it is. Person says, I got tingling down my arm. What do they have? They have a focal neurological deficit. So when you understand these things, it makes life so much easier. That's why I like them so much. So doctors, you like what I'm saying and you want to become more of that kind of doctor, check us out at the Smart Injury Doctors Program. If you want to sleep better at night, check us out. 800-940-6513 or look us up at www.smartinjurydoctors.com and call and set up an appointment with me. And I'll show you the program, the easiest program in the world to implement. It doesn't take hardly any time, right? There's not a whole long training program here. It doesn't take you a lot of time, and it comes with a lot of different tools to help. So if you're interested, call us, look us up. Doctors, as always, I appreciate your time and what you do each and every day. And I hope something that I said here resonates with you. Definitely guidelines are important. And I look forward to delivering more content with you on the next podcast.
You've been listening to the Smart Injury Doctors Podcast, the #1 audio production show for professionals in the U.S. injury market that want to deliver better injury services to the patients, clients, or insureds they serve. If you like what you heard today, please leave us a review and don't forget to join us on our next program.